Good morning. So I was thinking about something this morning, and it was about this concept of what we think about, and I kind of touched on this in a few different ways, a few different times, but maybe try to give another angle looking at it. One of my favorite movies of all time. It was based on a book that I really enjoyed, and it's called The Art of Racing in the Rain. And one of the themes that this book continually returns to, which makes me enjoy it, well, of course, it has race cars, so I love racing and everything racing, so that's definitely a big plus for me. But it talks about how the vehicle that you're racing is going to go where your eyes go. So what you look at, like this isn't necessarily a new concept to some people, but this may be another way of seeing the reality of it. If you're going 150 miles an hour and you look at the wall, there's a good chance that you're going to go into that wall, because what you're looking at is exactly where you're headed. So down the road, and at those speeds, the time to react has to be so quick that by the time you look at it, you're there. And obviously sometimes you might have to train your mind either to not do that or just to stay focused on the point that you want the car to go. And it's that way in life too. And we know that to some extent. We understand that what we think about is what we move towards. But especially in a social media world where information is just bombarding us, we forget that everything can be sort of dissected. And in that dissecting process, as you're moving closer to it, it's expanding around you. There's a lot of terrible, terrible, awful things that go on in the world. There's so many of them. If we put down a list of all the terrible things, we would probably drive ourselves absolutely mad looking at all the terrible things that happen. But what's worse than that is when you dive into one of those subjects of something that's terrible, and then you dissect it a little bit and you start to see how vast it actually is and how present it actually is within a subset or a subgroup of people that actually live that way. Now, the positive side to this is that that's also true with wonderful and good things, only those wonderful and good things don't trigger the same chemical responses in us. So sometimes the human being has more of a desire to see what disturbs them than they do what pleases them. That seems like sort of a sick concept, but it's the truth. People will start to look at the things that bother them, and then they'll put aside the things that they normally like to see or like to do. And the reason I bring this up is because there's a few people on my friends list, and I keep going back to this idea of what they're looking at all the time. They're seeing, because they post memes, they post these things, the subject over and over and over and over and over and over, and they're pounding it in. They're trying to pound it into other people, and they're really pounding it into their own psyche. And it's not helpful to them. Another concept that in my very first book I ever wrote was called Christianity in a World That Is Antichrist. Wow, I don't think I could even say it, let alone write the book, right? But no, seriously, Christianity in a World That Is Antichrist. And one of the concepts that I discussed in there is, if somebody does something you don't understand and it's not a good thing, don't spend a lot of time trying to understand what made them do it or what made them act in that way. Because through that very understanding are the same connections that can cause you to act in a similar fashion. And you may not believe that, but it is somewhat true. Maybe not to the same depth or to the extent, but if you've ever think about firefighters, that a lot of fires are started by firefighters, because if you go through some of the history of like people who do that, like who actually start fires, a lot of times it's the firefighters themselves who are arrested as the ones that started it. And it's because they're trying to understand something in a deep way, and that's actually a scary concept. So for me, is something, if I don't like something, I will only go so far in investigating why it's happening or who's involved. It's not my place to try and solve all the world's problems in that way. Like, there's people that are going to, go search those things out and try to understand it. Listen, I understand like investigations to try and catch somebody doing something. It makes sense to me that people, their minds can do that, or their minds are able to do that. But we've also seen instances where those people in those fields of investigation are guilty of the same similar crimes that they're investigating. And there's examples of that. It's a psychological problem that has to be dealt with, and it's part of the human being's nature when they're thinking about something to sort of understand it better by experiencing it. And so I don't have a fear so much that I'm going to fall into some negative, terrible, horrible behavior. Like, I don't believe in like being afraid of things like that. But I do know that if something doesn't give me the vibrations that resonate with me, I'm not going to focus on it. I'm not going to draw more of that vibration into my life. Now, having said all that, I think that if I was ever, and I'm not a huge fan of, people know me, I'm not a huge fan of government. I'm not a huge fan of like law enforcement that just is manipulated by the government. If I was ever going to be involved with law enforcement, I think the most interesting thing would be, and the best use of that would be to solve like murders. Like, so I know everything I said might sound like that's contradictory, but thankfully I'm not in that field. So because of, how I view these things, but I think that's the most interesting part of law enforcement is, and mainly because of all the crimes that can happen on the earth, those types of, that's sort of the finality of crime where, you really need to stop these people from doing this. This is something that shouldn't be happening, and I'm thankful that there are people that can do that and do it effectively, that can handle that job. But they have to be extremely mentally tough to do it. I mean, that's a fact. You have to have a mental toughness that you work on all the time in order to not go crazy because of what you see all the time. Most of us don't live in an environment where we have to do that, where we have to, compartmentalize the situations in our life. There's been times where I've had to do that, and a lot of men have had experiences in life where, and, especially if you've gone to war, done certain things, you've had to compartmentalize things in your life and learn to say, this section is over here and it's okay that's that way. And now this is where we are. So as we grow, as we start to try and have a good life, and we shut off that part of us that needs to go and understand things that don't resonate with us. A lot of this is about maturity. As a young person, you're trying to figure life out. As an adult, once you have your worldview sort of established, you don't need to go back and understand the motivations behind things that are not resonating with you. And don't waste your life doing it. Like, don't waste your life trying to understand why terrible things are happening and why terrible people are existing, and why there isn't more people that are paying attention to these terrible things in order to stop them. We stop terrible actions in the world by doing positive actions, not by keeping our focus on negative actions. I mean, you may not agree with what I'm saying, but I can tell you, for your own mental health, stop looking at the things that you don't want to see and start paying closer attention to the things that you do want to see. Because your vehicle goes where your eyes go. And that's just a fact. Have a good day.